Hello, and welcome to the Saturday broadcast regarding the Holy Week. Um, this Saturday today is really not part of the Holy Week yet. That's actually tomorrow. But as we get started here, before we actually get into the actual Holy Week, there's a couple of things that I wanted to sort of introduce here as part of our planning or preparation for this week. Something that's interesting, though, is that as Jesus began to prepare himself for what would be tomorrow in Holy Week, what we refer to as Palm Sunday. Something that we find regarding Jesus is that he was busy about the work of his Father, and something that to me at least I find very interesting is that the very first story about Jesus, other than his birth, Luke records in chapter 2 and verse 49. He says this, he says, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And what makes that interesting to me is that Jesus at the time was just a very young man, 12 years old or 13, and as Luke recorded this, Jesus said he must be about his Father's business, and the reality is that as everything else that we read regarding Jesus in the Gospels records him doing exactly that. And then again, Luke records this statement or this fact about Jesus. It says, as the time approached for him to be taken up into heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. That's recorded in Luke 9 and verse 41. And so what's sort of neat about this concept here is that Jesus was approaching a time in his life that was going to be extremely difficult. He was a long way away from Jerusalem at this time, very way up in northern Israel, as a matter of fact, and he was preparing himself to go through what would be, a very difficult time in his life, and something that I want to sort of talk about and think about is that during this season, when we kind of remember what exactly it is that Jesus did for us, is this idea that everything he did revolved around this idea of fulfilling what it is that God had placed him here, why he was here in the very first place. And so as we remember what Jesus did and remember that that's what he was about, there is a reality that reminds me that my life has a calling on it as well. And so does yours if you're a Christian. And all the things that we do as Christians should be done specifically with the purpose of pointing others to Jesus, and who is in fact the God of this universe. And Jesus declared to his disciples, pardon me, declared to his disciples that his mission and all of his methods revolve around his Father's commandments. As a matter of fact, he said this is recorded on the night prior to his death in John 15, verses 9 through 11. And it says this, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." And so the beginning of Jesus' work on earth was to be about his Father's business. And then here, as he approaches the very end, he's letting us understand that he has actually done just that. His charge to us is that we follow in his footsteps by keeping his commands. Again, Jesus being God is telling us that what we need to do is to remember that we are to be following his commands just as he followed his Father's commands. And so it's my prayer that as we move forward in our lives, that we are able to do exactly that. So here's something else to sort of think about, is that we have to be prepared to suffer just as Jesus did. Jesus, in fact, just a few moments later, told the disciples this. He said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In other words, Jesus is saying that what he brings to the table for us as Christians is a peace. In fact, he talked about a peace beyond understanding. But he also says, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I want to kind of think about another event or another something that happened. In fact, this happened about 3,400 years ago. 1406 BC is the best estimate for the actual date that this occurred. But many of you will remember that the Jews, as they left Egypt, were sent to, and they approached the promised land, and they were unfaithful. They actually weren't so much that they were unfaithful, but they lacked confidence in God. And as a result of that, they were sent back out into the desert to wander for 40 years. Well, as this nation, at the end of this 40 years approached, this again is in 1406 BC, as they approached the Jordan River on today, in the year 1406 BC, on the 10th of Nisan, that's today, was the day that they record that they crossed the Jordan River. The river was divided for Israel. Its waters rose up as if they were a wall on the side of them. And as they emerged from the Jordan River to take possession of this, for the first time, they were going to be treading on this holy soil. At that moment in their life as a nation, they were, at least at that moment, that's not something they always did, but at that moment, they were completely following God. And the things that lay ahead of them in their mind at that moment, again, was of no consequence. They were going to follow God no matter what. And as a result of that, and their willingness to do that, something that they were going to experience, or some of the things that they were going to experience, was to see this miracle. As amazing as it was, they were going to see even greater miracles than this in the days to come, as long as they continued to follow God. Now, here's the thing, and the reason that I bring that up is because this, I know that there's a lot of uncertainty in our world today. There's a lot of people wondering, how we're going to even pay our bills, or maybe even how we're going to pay for our next meal. And so as we think about this Holy Week, these things, what Jesus did each day of this, something that sort of comes to my mind is the reality that this road that Jesus was getting ready to enter into, and actually had been on for some time, was really quite a difficult road. Remember the garden scene where Jesus prayed and indicated that this was not just a minor struggle. It was actually something pretty significant to him. And so, but in spite of that, Jesus had decided simply to be about the business to which God had called him. And I think it's important for us to bear in mind that this is actually what we are going to need to do as well, is to stay on task, following through with what it is that God called us to do. And it's difficult to do that as church. We're not able to get together like we'd like to. We're not able to go see family and friends and some of the other things that we like to do, but we have to stay on task and follow through with what it is that God calls us to do. And the situation that we're in today really is much like the situation the Israelites were in some 3,400 years ago. God had made promises to them that he was going to provide for their welfare, but standing between them and the realization of that promise those promises was a number of different enemies. And the story of Israel, however, is that God had made them some promises, and it was he who was going to keep the promise. It wasn't the Israelites who had to go and make it happen. If you read through the story of Israel, these early years, this time as they were getting ready to enter the promised land, you'll find that the Israelites had to do only two things. And we have to do, these are the two things that we also have to pay attention to. Number one, they had to remain obedient. God had told them what it is they're going to do as they go into this promised land, and he was going to be the banner. He was going to be the one who took care of fulfilling his promise. They just had to remain obedient. The second thing that they had to do, even though it was difficult for them to see the end of this situation that they were in, was that they were going to have to trust in God's providence. You and I are not promised tomorrow, or we're not even really promised the rest of this day, but we are promised that our Christ will never leave us. He will never forsake us. He is right here with us, Christian friends. This is something that we can rely upon. Jesus said that we will have trouble in this world, but he also said, beware that we will have trouble, but he also said that I have already overcome the world. He is right here with us, and this world, this struggle that we're in, he's already overcome it. He knows what we're going through, and he will take care of us. So as we continue through this week, I want to look at some specific things that Jesus did. And we're going to be looking at all four gospel accounts. There's some lessons for us each day in this study. And then in the meantime, I wanted to give you this quick overview so that we can remember that no matter what the specific details, that we can do like Jesus did, and that is to be about our Father's business. Let us never lose sight of that fact. Thank you for your attention, and for any comments that you may have. I'd love to hear from you.